Hey guys, Kevin here from KF Music Studio. Welcome to the first episode of the KF Music Studio podcast, the podcast where we dive into all sorts of topics relating to music, leadership, and ministry. I am your host, Kevin, and man, I'm so glad that you've taken a few minutes of your day to listen to some thoughts that I've had and just my experience of living life. And today we're talking about a topic that's really important to me, one that I feel like we don't talk about as much, which is your first 90 days in a ministry role. So we're talking worship leaders, youth pastors, you just stepped in, you just got maybe your first job, or you just transitioned into another job, and man, you're taking over a whole new team, in some cases a whole new church, and your first 90 days are like so crucial to setting yourself up for success, or conversely, man, if they don't go the way that they can go or the way that they should go, you'll notice, man, you kind of set yourself back, and it's really tough to overcome that. So today we're talking about your first 90 days on the job. All right. So I think I have a few thoughts of sort of some things to keep in mind when you decide, hey, I'm stepping into this new role. I'm meeting, in some cases, a new senior pastor. I'm meeting a new board. If you're a worship leader, you're meeting a whole new team with a whole new dynamic. If you're a youth pastor, you're stepping in and you're meeting the students for the first time. You're meeting the parents. But I really think that these 90 days really apply to any new leadership position that you step into, any new job that you roll into. I think if you can keep these few things in mind, you'll set yourself up for some really good success. So I've got 5 of them here, so we're going to talk through these. So the first one is really simple. The first thing you should do in your first 90 days, and really this is your first 30 days, is you want to ask really good questions. A lot of times when we're in the interview process and we go through, interviewing with a senior pastor or with some of the other pastors on staff or a senior leader or a CEO or whatever you interview with, the impression you can get from the gig there many times is not quite the full picture when you step into the role, when you actually dig down deep and you're actually working with your volunteers, with your musicians, with the dynamics, with the budget, all of those things. So your first 90 days, man, you want to ask really good questions. You want to really not just ask good questions, but also ask really good follow-up questions. So you'll have plenty of time to kind of communicate your vision of where you believe the ministry, the leadership, the organization, where it's going to go. But your first few days, your first 90 days, you just want to ask people the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So by asking those good questions, you're doing a couple of things that we're going to expand upon a little bit later, but you're building good relational equity, which is so crucial when you step into a role. Like, you want to make sure that the people there, for one, just know you, but you get to know them. And by asking good questions of, hey, what's going well? What's not going well? Like, what's one thing that you would be interested in that you wish we did that we don't do? Asking good questions is so crucial because you're going to get a lot of information from being willing to talk less and listen more. Now, if we're honest, that's a good exercise just in general, not to do just in your first 90 days, but to do in general is to be willing to ask more questions than you are to give an opinion or give a vision. There's certainly time for that, but your first 90 days, you're stepping into a new role. I'm asking every person related to whatever I'm in charge of. So if I'm the worship leader, I'm asking questions of every volunteer that has ever served in the last 6 months. Maybe volunteers that served and before you got there, maybe stepped off the team. Ask them why. Ask them, hey, I'm stepping into this role. I just want to hear your heart. I want to hear your story. I want to hear how we got to this moment right here. Because I think when we can do that, when we can ask those good questions, when we can be willing to hear somebody's point of view and hear their opinion, it just allows them to see you not as just another boss coming in or another leader, but it allows them to see you as hopefully what you are, which is a humble servant of whatever ministry you're stepping into. right? So asking good questions. All right, some good examples. Um, I would ask every person on the team, every person that is currently serving, can you tell me one thing that you feel like we do really well? Always like to start with the positives. And then conversely, ask every member of the team, what's one thing that you wish we did that we don't currently do? Now, those two questions hold a lot of power, right? Because some of the best opinions are going to come from the people who are really working day to day, who are seeing the things that maybe you're not seeing, or maybe the leader that was there before didn't see. So by asking those questions, you're allowing them the space to say, you know what, I have noticed this, and this is something we do really well, but this is something I wish we could do more of. It seems like we get good feedback when we do this. For worship leaders, that includes your production staff. That includes maybe even ministry families. Maybe if you have like a husband who serves on your team, maybe asking the wife, the family, the kids, like, hey, what from your perspective, what's going well, what's not going well, right? And so by doing that, you're just going to get so much good information. You're going to build such great relational equity, and man, it's just going to be you're going to see the fruits of that immediately, just in building trust with your team. Which leads us to our second thing. In the first 90 days of your job, you want to build relational equity, meaning every relationship that we have as people is like a bank account, right? So I'm putting deposits into my bank account because there's going to be a time as a leader, you're going to need to ask some things from your team. You're going to need to make certain asks of them, and you're going to have to make a withdrawal, if you will, if you're using that bank analogy, that account analogy. So you can't make withdrawals from an account that doesn't have anything in it. So it's so important that you build relational equity. That's the biggest thing I notice when new leaders step in. Over the time I've been around new leaders, that's what we miss the most. We miss the time that we spend just doing life with our volunteers. And doing life is such a church cliche that we use so much. But what that means is like just pouring into somebody's life, asking them, hey, what's your journey as a musician? What's your journey as a Christian? Like, what's your journey at this location, at this church? Like, asking those questions and just building the relational equity, showing that you care about them as people first, not as just another PCO slot filled or as another thing done. Like, you're caring about them as people, and that is the most important thing. Like, if more people treated their subordinates or their direct reports like they were people, not like they were just commodities, or that they were just something to fill a planning center spot, I think you would see some huge growth. All right. So building relational equity can look like a couple of things. Food is always good. Food, especially for musicians, food will go a long way. So I stepped in as a worship leader a few years back, and one of the first things we did was I said, every time we have a rehearsal for the first couple of months, I'm going to get pizza for the team. Like, if I'm going to ask you to give a weekday night to come in and rehearse for Sunday, then the very least I could do was to feed you. Thinking that if I'm working a 9 to 5 and I'm stressed throughout the week, it's Thursday, and then you're asking me to come in and give an hour and a half of my time to rehearsal, which I see the value of and I know it's important, but I'm also tired, right? Like, I worked all day. I've been working all week, and people have lives. They have, they have different things that they walk through. And so that little providing pizza, which I think was like $20 a week. Some of it, sometimes it came out of the church budget. Other times I just personally did it. I just grabbed 2 pizzas from a local pizza place. And bonding over food is a great way to build that equity, because then while we're eating before rehearsal, as people would come in, you could ask them about, like, hey, how's work going this week? Like, hey, I remember you telling me last week that you were doing this project. Like, how did it end up? Having food beforehand was my way of showing the team that not only do I see the sacrifices that you're making, that I'm asking you to make, but I honor that, and I want to make sure that I make your life as easy as possible, right? By the way, asking the when you ask good questions and you have that kind of relational equity, I'm making deposits into that relationship account, if you will. Like, uh, it's amazing how quickly you can get somebody to see your vision and get on board with what the direction you want to take your ministry. If you're just willing to take the time to get to know people. I've spent a lot of years in music education in the classroom and teaching private lessons and doing KF Music Studio. And one of the things I've always said is that I teach people, not music. Like, the personal connection is the most important thing, because you can learn music anywhere. You can worship at any church, but what keeps people, high functioning people on your team that are thriving, that are just loving the ministry, that are going above and beyond, that are doing all the little things without being asked, that they just see it, they're on board, they're on mission. All of that comes from building good relational equity. Like, think about your life. Think about the bosses that you've had, the workplace situations you've had, the ministry situations that you volunteered in. Where are the ones that you just loved it and you crushed it and you were so on fire for what the ministry or the organization was doing? Think about why that was. And it's almost always because of a good leader, because of good relationships. And so that's the second thing I would think about, is building relational equity with every person. That's not just the people in your department, but that's, let's say you're a multi-site, that's everybody. So if you're working in worship and you have a children's pastor, that's developing a good relationship with them as well. Finding out about them, finding out about the church as a whole. Too often, I feel like we get siloed, where we say, man, I've got all this on my plate, and I'm working in the worship ministry. I can't notice what's going on in the parking lot, or I can't notice what's going on with connections, or or if you're at a small church, sometimes you're wearing multiple hats, right? And so building relationship equity with everybody and taking a few moments of your day to check in with people, to text people, to call people, to send them a note on their birthday, or if they get engaged or they get married, like, taking the time to show people that you see them goes such a long way in getting to of turning your program and your ministry to the direction you want it to go, right? So the third thing I wrote down here is your first 90 days should be all small changes, but no big changes, right? And we've all experienced this at one point or another, I'm sure, where a new boss comes in, a new manager comes in, new leadership comes in, and immediately they're coming in scorched earth. We're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to do that anymore. It's just like all of a sudden it's all these changes. The reality is, people don't like change. They just don't. I don't like change. You probably don't like change. I heard it said once that change is disappointing people at a rate that they can accept, which I think is hilarious. Like, when you change things without casting the proper vision and sort of priming that that's the change you want to go, man, you're just going to push people away. I've seen that time and time again, and it's almost always in worship, where a new worship leader comes in and we're going to make a bunch of changes. We didn't use Click before. All right, first week we're using Click. We got to have Click. We got to have the loops. We used to always sort of be a little bit more spontaneous in our worship sets and kind of go with the flow. And now a new leader comes in and says, no, actually, we want it to be a little bit more structured. In your first 90 days, you want to think about small changes that are beneficial for the team, Save the big changes after you've built that relational equity, right? Like the best example, I stepped in at a church one time as the worship leader, and it was a series of small things that I wanted to build equity with my team. I wanted to let them know that I just loved them and I cared about them. And as their pastor, like that's the most important thing, is that people feel seen, that they feel loved, that they know that you care about them as a person. And that doesn't, side note, that you care about them as a person regardless of what they do. So I've always approached any situation I stepped in as, if you stop serving today, if you stop serving on my team today, I would still love you just as much, whether or not you were on my team or if you were off it, right? Because if I'm only loving you because of what you can provide for my team or the things that I'm responsible for, if I only love you because of that, that's not love. That's manipulation, right? If I only develop a relationship with you because what I can get out of it, that's not love, that's manipulation. And as somebody who's been on both sides of the leadership dynamic, man, when you realize that somebody's manipulating you to serve on your team or to keep you on your team, man, that doesn't feel good at all. And that really just puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So when you talk about making changes, all of your small changes should be either putting out a fire that's an immediate thing we need to fix. So, for example, if you have a player who maybe shows up unprepared and the rest of the team notices it, but nothing seems to be getting done about it, that's something you do need to address right away. If the team feels like they're not appreciated by the senior pastor or by other pastors or anything like that, like that's something you need to take care of immediately. But if you step into a situation like at a small church, which I've done several times, and you walk in and you're like, okay, we barely have the soundboard up and going, you have to think about it as, man, if I introduce click and these guys have been serving for years and they've never used a click track before, it's going to be really hard. And I don't want to do that in the first 90 days because they don't know me. They don't have any trust in me and the vision that I have, and they don't see the value of it. So if I just come in and say, hey, we're going to start doing this, and if you don't like it, there's the door. Well, they're going to walk out the door. They're going to leave out the door. That's just what it's going to be. And my thought is like the general rule of thumb, I feel like you kind of turn over about half of your team on any leadership change. Like if you're a new youth pastor who steps in, it's about half. About half the kids will leave over the next 90 days. Now I don't have any data for that. Just empirically, just as I've done it, as I've stepped in, as I've seen other people step in, it's about half. Now, the half that fall away, the other half are going to get galvanized, and hopefully you can get them excited about where you're going and the mission, and they'll God will provide the back end if you're faithful in those seasons. But yeah, that's you have to be prepared for, about half your team to step off, and you want to do that in a good way. And you can mitigate that. I think you can lower that percentage if you make small changes that improve life. So hold off on your big changes. Spend 60 days 60 days, 90 days. Your first 3 months, you're just listening. You're asking good questions. You're building relationship equity, and your big changes will come. But you just want to learn what's going on right now. So I stepped in a church one time, and I said, man, the worship leader could use some snack, or the worship team could use some snacks in between services. Like I'm asking them to be there at rehearsal early in the morning. We did a couple of services. And so I said, I need to get snacks for them. Like we need to have some waters out and maybe some chips or just whatever I could get. Small changes that they were like, oh, he sees me. He sees the work we're doing. He sees that, man, I'm giving multiple hours on a Sunday morning. That went a long way. Because then after the 90 days, when you do want to make the big change and you do want to introduce something or go a different direction, you've built up enough trust with your people that they'll go with you a lot easier, right? Your fourth thing in your first 90 days that you really want to think about, I got two more for you. Fourth thing is that you want to turn over the rocks. And what do I mean by that? That's the old phrase of we all have things in our lives that we know we need to take care of it. Like, you see it over there, it's that rock in the corner, and you know you need to turn over the rock, but you're not really excited about what you're going to find, right? You're going to turn over that rock, and you just, even now, as I said that, you're thinking of that one thing. You're like, yeah, there's that one thing I got to think about right now, but I just don't want to do it. Can I encourage you in the first 90 days, turn over the rock? Like, dive into the things, the relationships, the tensions that just look like that they're not fun, but you got to do it. Because if you expect what you inspect. So if there are some areas that maybe just aren't going the way that they should, or if you have somebody doing a live stream and it's just not working the way it should, or, if you can tell that there's a relationship that's a little frosty, maybe between two team members, or maybe between that person and the church, like, be willing to approach that in your first 90 days and say, let's get this figured out. Like, those are the tough conversations that don't happen publicly. So many good relationship conversations need to happen behind closed doors. Like, if you notice that maybe one of your worship team members has kind of a bad attitude, calling them out on a Sunday morning in front of the rest of the team, or even worse, I've seen this a bunch, where people will make like a general passive aggressive statement to the whole team. So one person has a bad attitude, and then we're taking 5 minutes and saying, worse, in like a devotion, we're saying, man, guys, we just need to have a good attitude, and I'm just, we need to be thankful to be serving. Everybody there knows you're talking about that one person. Like, don't make general statements to everybody when it's one person. And we do that because as people, sometimes we don't like confrontation. We don't like change. We don't like confrontation. But being willing to turn over that rock and say, hey, I just get the sense that something's not right, and I don't know what that is, and I just need you to help me. Help me to understand. Like, I believe if we seek first to understand and then seek to be understood, you'll go so much farther as a leader and as a ministry, just for the kingdom. You'll go so much farther if you're willing to say, I don't understand what's happening here. I'm new in this role. Can you get me up to speed? Can we get this resolved? Can we get on the path to restitution and or whatever that looks like, right? What I've seen a lot is we ignore those problems. We hope they go away. We hope that they just stop serving on our team. We hope that they just, they're maybe they'll leave the church, or they'll leave your particular location, or anything like that. And can I just encourage you, if you're a worship leader, you are a pastor. Like, you don't need the title of pastor to pastor people, but we need to reflect the love of Jesus, right? And so be willing to have those hard conversations, and with the goal being, you're just trying to understand, how do we get here, right? I've seen this a lot in worship and production relationships. So if you have a sound guy, first things first, you are blessed if you have an audio engineer, like a solid one that pours into your team, that loves the church, that loves your location. Like, if you have a good audio person, a good production guy, man, they will cover a multitude of sins. And can I give you a bonus tip? Your first 7 days, take your production guy out to lunch. Take him out to lunch and just say, man, I'm new in this role. Like, you see so much more than I see. And naturally, take them out to lunch and just pick their brain and just say, man, you love them and you appreciate them. And always make sure, this could be a whole nother podcast conversation, and it probably will be. Treat your production people well. Like, if you have somebody running Pro Presenter slides or somebody running sound for you, keep them in the loop, right? Like, if you decide in rehearsal you're going to do another bridge or another chorus, or you're going to switch up the template of the song, communicate that to your production team. And every audio engineer and production person just said amen. But man, worship guys, student pastors, the more prepared we are, we don't always realize the stress that we put on other people when we fail to plan or when plans change and we don't communicate that, like, better to over communicate than under communicate. Treat your production people well, please. So speaking of turning over the rocks, like don't be afraid of those conversations. Don't come into them and put people on the defensive. Seek to understand. Just, hey, I noticed this. Can you help me understand how we got here? Is such a better way than saying, hey, you have a bad attitude and you're going to need to fix that. Like, the second you say that to somebody, they're already out. Like, any relationship equity you built, you closed that account. You pulled it all out. But if you say, hey, I noticed this and I just want to understand, how did we get here? Noticed and how did we get here kind of softens it. It allows them, the chance to open up. And it might not be right away, but again, you keep pouring into them. You keep thinking about that relational equity. You keep loving them, and eventually they'll come around, and you can find a solution that works. Right. So we've talked about your first 90 days on the job. You want to ask good questions. You want to make small changes, not big ones. You want to build relational equity with your team. You want to turn over the rocks. Anything in the ministry that you see budget wise, we didn't talk about budget, but if you notice, man, something doesn't look right, or something doesn't seem right, or a relationship doesn't seem right, be the leader, take a moment, figure it out. Even if you can't solve the problem, at least knowing that it's there and knowing what the problem is, man, goes a long way. And the fifth thing is, when you step into a new role, you need to find out what the win is for your boss. Like, if you're coming in as the worship leader and you have, let's say, a senior pastor that you report to, you need to find out what's important to them. And ideally, you find that out in the interview process. But if I'm honest, sometimes we don't always find the clear picture. So you always want to be thinking about, what's the win for my direct report? What's the win for if you're at a big multi-site church, what's the win for my director, like my director of worship? What's the win for them? What's something that they can then go to their boss and say, man, look at what they're doing? You need to find out what that win is. Can I be honest with you for a moment? Sometimes what they tell you the win is and what you actually see is something they care about are two different things, right? And so it's not about what they say the win is, it's what they show the win is. So if they're super excited about introducing new songs, so let's say your senior pastor is saying, man, I feel like our worship, we're kind of doing the same stuff. Hear that and say, okay, develop a plan and say, hey, over the next 90 days, I'm going to set a plan to try to introduce 4 or 5 new songs over the course of 90 days, right? If they're saying, man, I just feel like my Wednesday night students doesn't feel like it's a part of the church, right? It just feels like its own separate thing. It's siloed. Hear that and say, okay, how do I draw connections between Wednesday night and Sunday, right? Find out what the win is. Find out what the things are that really matter to your senior pastor, to your report, to your elder board, your deacons. Like, find out the things that really matter, that are a win, and try to really lean into those things, right? Now, I already hear some of you, myself included, we kind of generally push back on that because we're like, I know what I'm doing. I know what's important to me, and I'm going to do the things I want to do. I don't want to be a suck up. I don't want to be like, just doing whatever they want to do. I want to have my own vision. And you have to understand, man, you can get your vision and you can do the things you feel like God's calling you to do in this season. But it's not going to make a difference if it's not aligned with the wins that your senior pastor or your boss has. It just won't. And you can fight it, and you can fight it, and you can try to change it. You can try to change it. But at the end of the day, if there's a disconnect there because of the power imbalance of you stepping in as a leader and the people above you, you're going to have a hard time. And so can I just encourage you, sometimes you can even, depending on your relationship with your leader and your senior pastor, maybe you just ask the question, hey, what does success look like for you? in the next 90 days, so you just stepped into a role, your first day in your office, you're unpacking all your stuff, ask your senior pastor, ask your boss, hey, what's the win? 90 days from now, when we talk, I want to be successful. I want you to look at me and you be proud that you brought me onto the team. So what does that look like? What does success look like for you? And you may have to, that's a good question just every 30 days to circle in, like, hey, how do you feel like I'm being successful? Do you feel like we're still on course? Those small intentional conversations make a huge difference down the road. They make a huge difference because not only are you able to get in line with where the church is going and the mission and the vision that God has called the senior pastor to have, but on the flip side, it shows them that you are interested in that and you are interested in doing a good job. I've served as both a youth pastor and a worship leader, and I can tell you most worship leaders and youth pastors don't have a great reputation for communication and for being intentional about those things. And so you can really stand out by just being willing to ask those questions, to say, what's success look like for you? Is success, do you want us to have a writing culture here at the church? Do you want us to kind of develop original music? Is that the direction you want us to go? Do you want us to focus on a little bit more online? Maybe you're a smaller church and you're looking to sort of modernize some of the things. Whatever it is, you will get a lot of good information if you ask your leader, hey, what's the win for you? Because if I know the win for you, I can then kind of direct everything I do towards achieving that win. All right. So the 5 things in your first 90 days on the job: ask good questions, make small changes, not big ones, small changes, build relational equity with your team, turn over all the rocks, all the things that you need to take care of, just turn them over, find out what's going on, and then find out the win for your boss. If you can do those 5 things, your first 90 days are not only going to be more successful, but also you're going to set yourself up for a win down the road and hopefully for many years to come. All right. So I hope that this has given you some value. If it has, leave a comment below. Ask a follow-up question. Would love for this podcast to be very interactive where, I just want to hear your questions. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your experience. So this has been Kevin from KF Music Studio, episode 1 in the books, your first 90 days on the job. Man, we love you. We're praying for you. If there's anything we can do for you, leave a comment. If you leave a comment that says, I want $1 million, you ain't going to get that. Come on, I'm in ministry. You know how that is. But man, we love you. And I pray that this week, that this content really sets you on the path for great success in the future. God bless you.